Sure. Today I wrote a blog, and it got like some laugh reacts because I realized that the title sounds like it doesn't make sense because it's about unlearning racism against myself. And I feel like a lot of people, perhaps of the white variety, may be asking how a person of color of any other ethnicity could be racist against themselves, because it seems pretty weird to sort of hate yourself for that reason. As some people listening may know, as you three definitely know, I was raised by a single white mom. So a lot of the verbiage and language around me was not necessarily nice about Black people. It wasn't mean. My mom wanted me to always stand up for myself, but considering my mother was not a big fan of my father, there wasn't a lot of positivity around my Blackness. And as we've discussed before, because I was mixed, I definitely felt very awkward and uncomfortable with my otherness. I did not know how to get along with the other kids. And what I wrote about in my blog was the idea that I continued to put myself down out loud and on Facebook posts on purpose to make people like me, because it's easier to poke fun at yourself and put yourself down as a Black person than to try to stand up for yourself against all of your white peers if you're the only Black person. And I wanted to sort of have a roundtable discussion because I know that we all come from very different upbringings, different locations, different family entities. And I am curious to know if you're, having more Black parents made that easier for you, if you often found yourself also thinking in the same way where you made fun of your own Blackness or were the first ones to say the Black joke in a room, or if this is something that you're like, I don't understand, Hillary, how you ever talked about yourself in that way. I think being Black is the coolest thing. Clinton, do you want to go first?
I zoned out for a minute. I thought this was your segment where you were talking about yourself. What are my thoughts on?
Like, I'm curious to know if you ever yourself were put in a position where you put yourself down for being Black because you thought that would make yourself more likable. If you ever tried to really like assimilate with a white group of people to be more likable in that way, or if you've, because you were raised with other Black siblings and by Black parents, if that made you appreciate yourself in a way that I wrote in my blog that I just did not have.
I mean, I would feel any Black person growing up in North America wasn't being completely honest with themselves if they tried to say that they were never a victim of that in any shape, form, or regard whatsoever. I wasn't raised by Black parents. My father is Black and my mom is white, but I grew up in the same household with them, and they're still married to this day. My parents raised me in a Christian home and with the strong viewpoint that to not see color. Someone's having a bunch of music playing somewhere in the background, and that's not me this time. That's not my nighttime mode turning on my phone.
That was me, and I thought I was.
Can y'all hear that? Oh, okay. I don't. Where was I? Was that Michael
Christian
Jackson?
Household, yes. Thank you.
Michael.
You've now ruined the whole segment.
This is the guy, the one that's always talking about the flow.
Yeah, exactly.
My bad.
Kidding. It's all good. It's all good. It's all good. I may cut this part, even though I rarely cut anything out. Hillary, what was I saying?
Christian
We're filming
household.
A lot later than normal.
You
basically my parents raised me with the good intention of trying to make us all colorblind, right? And as an interracial person growing up, I think a lot of us dealt with the who am I anyways. I've talked about this many times in the past. Am I Black? Am I white? Am I sometimes, I'm too white for the Black people, too Black for the white people? I think I've done it. I can't think of specific examples. I raised my eye when I first saw that you had written that, but I don't want to be a hypocrite. I feel like I've conformed. I grew up in a really multicultural part of Toronto, but I'm sure I've made some jokes about myself in my life. I can't think that I haven't, and it's I haven't read your blog yet, and I'll probably read it after this. But it's awesome the way you can be so honest about things and really not be afraid to show your vulnerabilities in your work. So it's really
Thank
cool.
you. I think there's something to be said about the fact that like I also grew up in this generation where like unfortunately I basically used Facebook as a diary. So every uncomfortability I had with my existence as a Black person, a woman, a queer is like very well documented, which like lends well to writing the blog, but it's also really weird to look back doing a podcast with a bunch of Black people where I can see evidence that I did not like the fact that I was Black. Alon,
Oh,
what do you think?
Oh, Clayton, were you done? Were you gonna?
no, yeah, I'm done.
Okay. I can resonate with what you're saying, and it's interesting because I was raised by two Black parents. My dad was Scottish, and my mom was Irish, Puerto Rican, and a bit of Native thrown in there. So, and it's my grandmother's Puerto Rican, but they were visibly Black people, right? But I grew up not being proud to be Black, and it wasn't because my parents weren't. I just, like, my parents, I guess, would raise me to be like, okay, well, everything is everything. Yes, there's racism. Be aware of it. Like, my mom always wanted me to make sure that because I had a thing for Wonder Woman when I was a kid. I still do as an adult. But I had a big thing for Wonder Woman. I guess the story goes, I used to like run to the TV when I was like 5 years old and stand there and like just like gawk at Linda Carter and like knee-high boots and so I've had a thing for brunettes since day one, right? So my mom was like, well, make sure that you marry.
I swear you're blushing right now,
Dude. Listen, the thirst is real. So anyway, fast forward. So my mom was always like, make sure whoever you end up with. We had this conversation. My mom was like, I know you like white girls. I've accepted that. She's like, but just make sure she can tan. And I ended up with like every white girl who doesn't tan. Like, I have a thing for redheads. It's a bad thing. It's a whole thing. That was the conversation I had with my mother, like my teen years, like make sure she can tan, right? Because she's like, Black men, they have it hard, and as you climb the corporate ladder and you go into business, it's going to be harder if you have a white wife and you have to kind of play the game. And so my parents were conscious of it, but I was not comfortable in my own skin for a very long time. I don't think I got comfortable being a Black man until I was in, my mid-30s, which is really fucked up to say. And even to the point of, choosing subconsciously a mother for my son. Like, I didn't want my son to be as dark as I am. Right. So I thought if my kid was lighter, it would be easier for him. Joke's on me. It's not. So, Team Light Skin gets no breaks and gets no love. So it's so, but to think about that though, and I've had this conversation with my wife, to think about that, to hate yourself that much because of what you see or don't see on TV, for what you are taught and not taught in school. And to hate yourself that much that you literally don't want your offspring to be the same shade as you, because you feel if they're white passing, that it's going to be easier for them than it is for you, is really fucked up. And I didn't realize that until I got older and started going to therapy and breaking this shit down. Have I ever made fun of myself for being Black? No. Have I definitely felt the awkwardness of being the only Black person? Yes, because I was always too white for Black people and damn sure too Black for white people. Throughout my entire school years, like, my parents always moved to the whitest fucking neighborhoods they could find, and just has always happened this way. And so therefore I was always the second Black kid, because my sister was the other one. So we were the two Black kids in school always. And until I moved to the Bronx, and then that was different. But it's I've never hated myself to the point where I would make fun of myself. But I definitely was not a proud Black child. Because everything that I saw on TV and everything that I aspired and liked didn't fall into that typically Black box, right? So I didn't learn to appreciate hip hop until I was in my 20s. I was a rock kid. I still am a rock kid. Like, I was a grunge kid, man. Please, I was emo before emo was emo, right? So like, but to be a Black grunge kid in the 90s was really out of place and just not even like talked about or even portrayed ever on MTV anywhere, right? There were no black rock grunge kids. And here I was, here my sister and I were. My sister was into Tool and Pearl Jam, and here I am, you know, and Bush and Nirvana, Stone Temple Pilots, and I'm a drummer, and you know, and that's what I do. And this is the music I'm gravitating. Even my parents were like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Like they were, you know, they were like, you know, 60s and 70s R&B people, and they're like, "What's wrong with like our children?" So like nothing I like. So I like, you know, like I like sci-fi, and I loved anime, and I, you know, and I loved rock music, and I, you know, so I loved all these things that checked off in the white category, but I was physically too black to be, so you know, to fit in with the white kids, and having all these white interests, quote unquote, I couldn't fit in with the black kids. So yeah, I feel you in the respect of just, you know, not appreciating one's race and, you know, and hue on the color wheel, on a different type of scale. So I guess, you know, even though I didn't verbally say anything, I think that the moves that I made and or didn't make in my life, I think I probably was doing the same thing. I just didn't verbalize it on a social media platform. But, you know, I definitely was not walking around as a proud black male, you know, happy to be. I didn't, because the world around me was and still is very much catered to the white male demographic, right? All the heroes are white males. All of your, you know, your spies and all the people that I wanted to be like were all white, right? So I mean, like when you grow up wanting, you liking even Batman. Listen, I am Batman, right? Tattoo and all, right? I am Batman. But I remember, and this is a quick story. I went to they used to do this Comic-Con thing here in Moncton, at Comic Hunter, and there were a couple artists there, and so anyway, they were doing caricatures. So Zach got Captain America. That's fine. So the artist, Danica, was like, well, what do you want? And I'm like, can I get Batman? But I'm like, can you do me one favor? I'm like, can you make Batman look like me? Because this will be the only time I will ever see Batman be black. And she was like, yeah, got it. It's hanging up on my wall. So I finally got to be Batman in a character. And as silly and as stupid, as trivial as that may sound, and the story probably will not resonate with anybody, but the point is, that was the one time in my life that I actually could resonate with that. But just to say that, you know, I always liked superheroes and spies and espionage, all this shit, and everything that I saw was all white dudes. Yeah. So, you know, when you're going around and you're like, and you like certain things, you aspire to be, you know, certain ways or have certain characteristics, but you don't see yourself in that. It's a very weird mix. So yes, long story short, I resonate with what you're saying, Hillary. I get it. It's just a generational thing where you showed it on a social platform, and I kind of kept it internal and did it that way, right? So, but I get it. I totally get it.
I will say that I felt the same way in terms of like representation in girls stuff on TV show as well. Like the show Totally Spies is 3 white girls with different colored hair. The Powerpuff Girls are 3 white girls with different colored hair.
Girls, yeah.
Yeah. And then I always wanted the white Barbie dolls and the white Polly Pockets, and I didn't want to mess with the black ones because I just wanted what every other kid have, and I didn't care about representation at the time without thinking about how that would like mold my mind or change my language and rhetoric towards myself. Fidel, you're also a dad. So in terms of what like Alon's talked about, did you feel that way at all in terms of thinking about your kids and colorism and your experiences and how that would translate through your parenting or your hopes for your kids?
Well, for me, it's a bit different because I grew up in the Caribbean, in the Spanish Caribbean, which is Latin American side. And Latin America and the Caribbean have a little bit of a weird thing with colonization. Mm-hmm. So if you ever go to any part of the Caribbean where the popularity is men in black, you will see that there is a hidden racism, but that just doesn't happen to you. That happens to everybody, right? So in Dominican Republic specifically, there's something like if you marry a white woman and you have a kids, they say you are bettering the race. That's a thing. Like they're saying, oh, you're bettering the race because you're a black guy that married a white woman. There's also women that they don't. Now it's changing, but when I grew up there, women weren't allowed to have their afro. That looked bad. That was not. That was frowned upon. Women needed to have their hair straightened. That's talking that 90% of women in that country don't have straight hair. So that is crazy that everybody has to have their hair straight, and everybody there has to. They all want to look whiter because the whiter you are, the better you get treated. And but again, that's a country thing, right? And it's not just us. If you go to Colombia, if you go to Cuba, if you go to Jamaica, if you go to different places like that, that is the ideal. Like the white people get a better treatment than the black people. And again, this is for countries that 90% of the people are black. So it's a again, I only notice it when I was growing up that I kind of realized that it was like, oh, but there again, there's when the education starts. Like I was very lucky to get educated in the best schools, in the best universities, and that's how I was able to realize what it is, and it's because of history. So having that said, when a whole country's going through it, it feels different. It's it becomes normal, right? And I think that's one of the things that happen to a lot of people here, that it just becomes normal until they figure it out or somebody points it to you. Because here, because the majority of people are white, and you're black, somebody's gonna point to you that you're black. And that's the thing with my kids. My kids don't realize it. They don't really care. They say like, oh, you're brown. Oh, daddy, you're brown like me. Their cousins are white, but they don't really see it. That's not really something that they forever. But there's gonna come a moment that somebody's gonna tell them. Somebody's gonna point it. Somebody's gonna say like, oh, no, you're different. And that's the different thing. And regarding my kids and things, again, I'm lucky that I've been educated well enough that I have to have that talk with my kids. Like when they're like, I'm gonna have to talk to them and say, hey, look, this is how it goes. This is how the world works, and this is what you looked into. So definitely that is something that I'm prepared to do. But the other thing is like I also want to show them what a lot of guys, and maybe you and Clinton can relate more because you're mixed, right? Like you have a white parent and a black parent. That's what my kids are, but I have to explain them that. I guess a lot of people don't explain that, so I have to explain them the whole history of things, and also that they need to cherish those both things at the same time, but they also need to be aware what they're gonna get cataloged in. Because again, I don't. If there was a choice to you in your time, if they would have told you, what do you want to be, black or white, you probably would have said white, right? Because your mom was white, you were raised by your mom, that was the character. But that you didn't pick that. Nobody picked that. They picked it on you. They said like, oh, no, you're this, right? And you're like, oh, and then you're like, oh, okay, what I gotta do? So to the sense that I personally myself, again, because I grew up in a world that everybody is, we that's normal for us. It was normal. It's only when you get out that you figure out like, oh, that's not normal, that everybody wants to be whitewashed and people making fall. And even when you're dark skinned, like in Dominican, the darker you are, people discriminated you because you're darker than the other dark person, which is insane. Like you're being racist. Two black people being racist amongst each other. But it is something that again, we everything that happened, it happened to me, but for us it was like it happened to everybody else that I was with, right?
Mhm.
So it wasn't like weird. It was like, oh, okay, we all do the same thing. So I guess that's how I can put it.
Well, I mean, colorism is super, super real. And also in terms of like, if we could have been like prescribed, I guess, our own identities. I forget if I've talked about this on here before, but in terms of like fat phobia, Lizzo went on TikTok and was saying like, if everyone could choose, there's such inherent fat phobia, no one would actively say that they want to be plus size, in the same way that just because of how aggressive the discrimination is against Black people. No one at this point would choose to be Black because it's basically taking your life into your own hands. People, like, cops are actively killing Black people in the States. Why would you choose to live a life that is actively more difficult? And while I was very proud of like my color and I loved being able to talk about my father's heritage, I also was raised to have this very big pride about being Acadian, despite the fact that my mom hated speaking French and found it more difficult. I was raised to be so very proudly Acadian that I felt like I had to defend that while also trying to defend my Blackness. Clinton, you had your hand up?
Just to respond to what Fidel said, and you guys all shared some really amazing stuff, and I know my answer was short, but no, like if given the option, I can actually say that no, I definitely wouldn't choose to be white. However, I don't know that I would choose to be Black. Again, I need to stress that a lot of people grew up around maybe either white people or Black people, but I had the benefit of growing up around a really multicultural environment. And at the end of the day, and even though I may have been a bit ashamed of this over the past year, I think I'm back to being able to say that, you know, I really just want to be Canadian. And I think Canadians should strive towards a future where we can really just a faraway future probably where we can really just identify as being Canadian and not have, and that's kind of the beauty of Canada, where you can be who and what you want to be, and you shouldn't be limited by the pigment of your skin or the expectations. I mean, like Alon, even the idea that I could be wrong, it almost felt like you feel that you should feel guilty for liking the things you liked growing up. But I mean, without the internet, there was no way for you to know how many other Black kids out there really like that stuff, other than maybe the people in your neighborhoods. I grew up as a huge sci-fi junkie, Star Wars, Star Trek all the time, and so did my Jamaican dad. So that's not uncommon at all. Yeah, I had the benefit of unpopular opinion, but like, you know, I've seen the pros and cons of both white culture and Black culture, and I've been right in the mix through all of it. um I'd rather just be me, and I'd rather just, if anything, be Canadian, because in America, like, they make you pick, what are you, white or Black? Here, I don't think you have to. I know Canada is going through a lot of reconciliation and learning and growing and truth seeking, but if I had to choose, I would pick that third option and be a Canadian, and that's what I'd want my kids to be too.
If we could get to a point where Canadian was synonymous with a multiculturalism, I would say yes, that I agree with that.
Right.
I still feel that like
what
Canadian is sort of still very much perceived it like we're still a white privileged country ruled under a monarchy that I don't think does enough for its minorities to be something like I 100% identify as like if someone asks me what I am, I've almost always said Canadian and then Acadian. Now I say Senegalese Acadian because I'm giving props to my father down the hall because he's earned them. And I do feel proud about that aspect of my life now. But I do find that if we were to just, you know, I don't know that you're necessarily saying throw out all of, I know you're not saying throw out all the other cultures, but like I think that I want everyone to be proud to be Canadian. I agree that a lot of truth and reconciliation needs to be made, but I think that then Canada needs to be recognized more as like not that melting pot that sort of blankets all of them, but that mosaic where everyone is so welcome that you can say Canadian and it doesn't have to mean toques and poutine.
You know what? You're right, because, you know, to me, until I moved to New Brunswick 11 years ago, to me, being Canadian was synonymous with being Torontonian and from Toronto. And to me, Canada was the people I saw in Toronto. It was all the different cultures. So that's a good point. Canada's diverse. I mean, over in Alberta, they didn't even have Black people. Like the Black people started off in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. I mean, Alberta, like Canada is big and huge and diverse. And to me, when I'm speaking, I guess I'm still thinking of this as my life growing up and being from Toronto, as opposed to being from quote unquote Canada, which is for the most part really rural with not a lot of multiculturalism. So I mean,
when I studied like Canadian literature, it was one of my first introductions into the idea of like Asian people post like some of the like like racism of the war and the idea of like refugees being put in these like poor situations, and the story of Louis Riel and all of these things that I didn't even know about Canada because of our education system. So for me, the idea of Canada was always very white and roots and tragically hip, as Alon once said. And that to me was Canada. And I'm learning that it's this big mosaic, especially now that I've lived in Ontario and I see. But if I was still the like girl from Moncton who thought that rouge was the be all and end all of the weekend, Canada did not have that much color or diversity or interesting elements. And I think that if Canada could change that viewpoint for a lot of the people who do live in these like rural corners, then we could be getting somewhere, I think, as a country.
I haven't heard that term, the differentiating between mosaic and melting pot in quite some time. I remember, I think it was the early 2000s when people were like, no, like the melting pot of the United States was the wrong ideal, right? Because a melting pot means that you lose all of your uniqueness,
yes,
and you become one robot army. And that's basically what America wanted. So melting pot for America was actually exactly what it was. But, America spent a lot of time and a lot of propaganda dollars making everyone think that that was a positive thing when it wasn't. So when you came to America, yeah, you had to change your last name or change your name in general, look the part, dress the part, work the job, pay the taxes, speak the language, and that was it. So yeah, the mosaic is I haven't heard those two terms in quite some time, but yeah, I agree. The face of Canada for me as an American was always a white dude on a moose in a fucking Mountie uniform, right? Like, what I mean? Like that's always what I've known. Like as an American, that's always the image of Canada. It isn't the multicultural aspect of Canada that's put out. But I blame the Canadian government for that. Again, it's that worldwide propaganda message that Canada sends out, whether it be through movies or through through the music. It is not representative of what the country is, and I think Canada has a very rare and unique opportunity right now to change that in a very drastic way and do a 180, and to begin including everyone, in their mission statement and in their imagery. And
yeah, I never even understood all those jokes about Canadians growing up, right? About the accents, a boot, and the way they pronounce things. I didn't get it because no one I knew, the white people I knew in Toronto, they didn't talk like that. So I thought it was all confusing to me. Mounties and RCMP and the guys in the hats and the red out uniforms.
But we had a stupid show called we had a stupid show on CBS called Due South, and it was about this Canadian Mountie who was like in the States, and like he had like a US female love interest, and they had these stupid comedic adventures, and that was basically the Canadian the imagery of Canada for us.
We had that here too.
They're releasing a Canadian Pixar animated movie they just announced, so it'll be interesting to see how that looks.
Going red. No, but I was gonna tell, like, I think that's one of the reasons for people need to travel, because I mean I never, and I think that's what a lot of people don't see when you're in a certain spot. If you go to places that everybody's black, nobody looks of themselves as black. Like nobody sees themselves like they are Nigerian, they are Ghanese, they're Puerto Rican, they're Cuban, they're whatever. They don't see themselves as a race. It is only when you come to the United States specifically that everybody looks at you as African American, which, if the African American term is completely wrong, because Egyptians are African, Tunisians are Africans, Algerians are Africans, because they're all in Africa, right? So if I got Algerian parents and I'm born in the States, I'm officially an African American, but I'm not black. I'm Middle Eastern. So I think that's one of the things that I would say, that I wouldn't say like it's a propaganda machine regarding to Canada, because I feel like the way Canada is portrayed is not even by Canadians. Because if you look at Africa, in the United States, how they portray Africa, or they portray Latinos, or they portray Asians, especially Asians. Like every time we looked at China, we always saw like a kung fu, martial arts type of people. And if you go to China, or Japan, that's not really what is happening there. Or like, I think a lot of the misperception are not made by Canada, or perceptions of races are not even made by country. I think a lot of it, and I can definitely say this, a lot of it is done in the United States. A lot of
Mhm.
perception, because it's only when you get there, and I can tell you that because when you get there, they tell you, what are you, or where are you from? And then if you say to them, I am American, they're like, okay, but are you, he's black. Or if you're Dominican, which is the funny thing, if you're Dominican in the States, uh, and you don't have an accent and you speak like me, they think you're African American. And I'm like, no, I'm Latino. Oh, really? What, you're Dominican? It's like, oh, really? Like, there's a stereotype here. There's always a stereotype. So
Mhm.
I think one of the things that we have to do as a society, and I think some places like Toronto do it really well. In Toronto, I think they do it pretty well. They don't stereotype people as much. Like, there's a lot of there's a big Asian community that they're Canadians, that they're like fifth generation Canadians, that they have maybe ties to Asia or Taiwan or India or someplace like that. Their parents came in the 30s or in the 20s. So, but I think as a society, we need to kind of, in Canada specifically, not talking to anywhere else in the world because everything's different. In Canada, I think as a society, we need to understand that people are not being treated equally
Mhm.
because of certain aspects of their race or tribes or whatever. And also, we need to understand that the system wasn't made equally, and therefore it needs to be updated constantly for it to be changed and for it to take out all these stereotypes. Definitely in Canada. In the United States, it's a whole different ballgame. I don't even know how the hell that they're gonna fix that, but definitely that is where I stand on. So
Yep.